Hey, let's take a look at Poseidon now. This is a game I'm borrowing, actually. One of the guys down at Fun Again Games was willing to let me take a copy home to film. And we were playing it last night, and I had enough fun with it. It's basically a pure XX that's been, translated to ancient Greece. No railways or anything like that. You're going to be playing, instead of corporations, you're going to be controlling kingdoms. And instead of shares of stock, they have merchants and stuff like that. But it all works kind of the same. The only thing is, you're not going to have the same kind of route building, but you do have a route building system that's similar in concept to 2038's. This is the only XX game I've seen do that. It has some interesting mechanisms that work well with the specifics, basically. I'll take a look at that as we go. I think there was more I wanted to say initially, but whatever. Let's go over what some of the pieces are and then how they translate. I'm going to give this whole as kind of an XX view, because the guy who bought it, this is where I wanted to go, had the feeling that this was going to be a more Euro-like XX game. It had a short playing time, supposedly 90 to 120 minutes. It took us significantly more than that, I think. I don't know. I think it took us more like 3.5 hours to get through it. But we're kind of a slow group no matter what. It has a fairly small player count, 2 to 5, and without the track lays and everything, he had the feeling that it would be somewhat lighter than most XXs, something of a bridge game. It's got the wooden pieces, which are going to be more attractive to your Euro gamer than chits would be. However, the reality is it's a somewhat shorter, there's no question of that, fixed length XX game, and there's others that are fixed length. I think 1880 was fixed length. You still have to finish, play a full game of that. But it really has mostly the same kind of concepts, etc., and it's probably a little longer than 2 hours for any starting group. Going over the pieces, like I said, you have your kingdom mats. You have these, which represent merchants. They're going to be the equivalent to a stock in the game. But unlike stocks, these are also your tokens, or more like your claims from 2038, which makes them very interesting in some ways. This is a special piece. This is your new home. You're allowed to set one of these down during the game, where you basically can move your starting location. This is your exploration ship. It's got very limited range. It's how you're going to claim things throughout the game. This is a special piece. Each company is going to be allowed to take advantage of one. Each kingdom's allowed to take advantage of one of these special cards. Read private company. And some of them require the use of the token. This is going to be your prestige marker. Read stock value. And this is the king card. Read president certificate. Little difference. It's going to count as 3 shares. It has to have 3 merchants on it. The board itself, here's your trains, ships. And they run from the 2 up to the E, fairly standard progression there. You're going to have phase changes taking place, a little different from what you're used to in most XXs. So the 1830 variety XXs, right? 3 institutes of phase change. It's not the case here. It's the 4, which destroys the 2s, and the 6, which destroys the 3s. And then the unlimited or diesel, which destroys the 4s. So there was always something interesting about having the phase changes interleaved with the train rusting, and that's been taken away from this, and they're kind of stacked in the same slots. You have a limit of certificates, i.e. a limit of merchant discs that you can have in your possession. The map itself, you have various locations on the map. They all look like cities and towns pretty much. There's some empty place. And they have circles on them, which can block movement. Well, not movement, but they can block other people from being able to claim them, essentially. It's got a claim mechanism similar to the 2038 one, and you'll be putting your merchants into there. The merchants serve this interesting dual purpose where they're acting as the stocks that you get to release into, I guess, the general marketplace or whatever. It's basically the bank pool where they're available for purchase, and they produce income when you release them, or they produce capital for your corporation, kingdom, but they also are going to be used to claim trading markets, which means the more merchants that you throw out in here to raise capital, the less you're going to have capable of actually doing business and making you money for the kingdom. It's an interesting little balance there that I think a lot of what's cool about this game kind of works around. All right, so let's take a look. Well, at the beginning of the game, you have a private round distribution, private company distribution. All these special cards, whoever's the last player, and then going in reverse order, will choose one of these. And then depending on the number of players, you may get multiple choices. I'm going to be playing a 5-player game, so everybody chooses one, and there's going to be one left over that nobody chooses. In the 3-player game, we basically each got twice a round to choose. The problem with this, of course, is things, if they're not, and then you pay the cost of them. If things aren't valued correctly, there's nothing to kind of balance this out and make sure that nothing gets, an unfair advantage. So in the original 1830, Cambid and Amboy was probably the most valuable of them, and it was worth a fair deal more than its face value, but the bidding mechanism prevented it from going for its face value. Here, everything goes exactly for face value, and there's an order to which you get the choice of having it. So there's quite the possibility that if these are a little unbalanced, they could actually create an unbalance throughout the game that would be hard to recover from. I don't have an opinion on whether they are or not. Okay, after you do that, then starting with the first player, you are allowed to conduct what is called we're on the German side of the map. Oops. Let's make this a little easier on me. You're allowed to conduct a merchant round. The way a merchant round, and there's really not that much difference between the two sides. The way a merchant round works is it's essentially a stock round. You're going to be going around and performing stock action type things. Well, the first thing that you kind of might want to do is to float a kingdom, is to get one of the kingdoms claimed. And the way you do that, the way you float things in this is kind of interesting. You pull an odd number of merchants that's at least equal to 5, and that's going to be your initial offering for the company, basically. You will have to buy more than half of that odd number of merchants that you send out. So if you send 5 out, you're going to have to buy 3 of them. You can set the starting value anywhere you like. It's not a par or anything like that. It's just going to be the prestige value. That's the share value of of the company, kingdom. You'll pay for the ones that you take at the price that you set it. The others are released into the merchant pool. You pay the bank for the ones you want. The kingdom gets the total value of all the merchants that it releases in cash. So you have a lot of control over how many stocks you're releasing, etc., or how many merchants you're releasing. And that's important because, of course, the merchants you're releasing are also going to cut down on how many spaces that you have available in the long game. The other thing that you can do is you can purchase a merchant from here at the par value, and or you can sell merchants, and you can sell merchants before you float a company too. And any merchants that you sell, you just dump into here and you get their prestige value in cash from the bank. Now, if the company, if the kingdom, if the king, kingdom owner, if the king ends up selling any merchants of his own company, that decreases the prestige by one space. Once everybody passes, the merchant round, stock round ends. And I believe there's two things that happen here. First of all, if anybody has, at the end of the entire round, more merchants than the current president, he has the option to take the company over. You can never force someone to take, or the kingdom over. You can never force someone to be king. But if you have more, you're able to take it over. You exchange 3 of your merchants for the 3 that are on here. And remember, you have to buy at least 3 when you float it. Well, they go on here. Okay, I'm going to have to do a battery change, which sucks because this was going to be a nice one-shotter otherwise. After everybody passes consecutively, the starting player card then moves to the next player in order. I.e., there's no advantage to passing early or anything like that, which was always kind of a funky mechanism anyway. But in this case, it means that there's a certain pattern that takes place that's just fixed by player seating order, which I kind of don't like. I like trying to manipulate the market so that you get first, even though there's some funniness about it, which I do have questions. Basically, I think your standard XX, instead of just a priority deal and seating order being so important, since seating order is really random, I think actually what it should be is first person who passes out and says they're done gets the first deal. Second person gets a second deal. You know what I mean? So that player order is basically determined by I am passing, I will not do anything else. Of course, that wouldn't allow you to get back in the market once you make that decision. So there would have to be like 2 kinds of passes and stuff like that. I don't know. Okay. So the next thing that happens is you go down to one of these ER. I don't know what it stands for, but it's like your operating rounds, essentially. And each person has to make a decision on these suckers. They may either take the cash payout, which is different for each era. So this pays 50 in the first period of the game and nothing afterwards, 40, nothing afterwards. 10 in the first, 5 in the second, nothing, etc. So they basically kind of close out later, but you never are forced to use them until you want to. You can hold on to them when they're not paying you income. So you get that cash, and then any kingdoms that you own, you can kind of raid their money. And that differs by era. It starts out at 5 in the first era, then goes to 10, 15, and finally to 20 in the fourth era. And basically you just take cash out of, their treasury and put it in your own. It's kind of an advantage of being the king. So it gives you a little bit extra income, which is especially useful early in the game, I think, when runs are kind of small. Okay. So when you make this choice, well, each of these has their own special ability, which I guess I could kind of go through. These three are the early high cultures. The way they work is you get that little colored circle marker and you place it for one of your kingdoms on the space that corresponds with it. And now you can visit this, no one else can. There's no other way to end up getting a claim on one of these, a trading post. So you have to take it through that card. The Delian League is kind of neat. This allows you to use this little white marker, and actually I switched the white markers. It's supposed to be this one, I think, but it allows you to use the little white marker. You cap it on top of one of your trading posts, and it'll double the value of that trading post for the rest of the game. Now this is kind of cool because it's fairly cheap. It's only 30. It has no income, so you kind of want to use it, and it can work really well together. This is what I got in the game I played with the Mycenae, which ends up getting you a 6 doubled as 12. A pretty good place to visit. Usually there's nothing like that on the game that's free. These two are kind of interesting. Let's go to this one because it's easiest. You can exchange this for a merchant from the merchant pool. Stops making you money? Well, after round 1, it's time to get the highest valued share that there is available. This one, on each of phases 2 through 4, when it stops producing money, you can basically flip it over and turn it German once per phase, and it allows one of your companies to double the range of their merchant fleet, and that's kind of interesting. It'd be nice if it could be the trading fleet too, but yeah, not the exploration fleet. Okay. So how you actually run one of your companies? Well, they run in prestige order, just like stock value running in an XX, in a normal XX. And let's see. The first thing that you do, I believe, is you take your little fleet marker, and you can use this as both your discovery and your trading fleet if you want. And you're allowed to explore. Now they're allowed to explore coming from their home a certain amount of hexes out based on the era. In the first era, that's 1 hex out. In the second era, it's 2 hexes out. And then it goes to 3 and 4. And exploration means moving your ship that many spaces. And as you go, you can dump things. You can take these little access markers, I don't know what they're called, reserves or something, and you can place them in the locations you travel to. The other thing that you can place is you could place your one and only new home in. Okay, the new home would have to go in a completely unoccupied hex, and it breaks the hex. It turns it into a home area which has no trading value, and no one else can put any markers in there. The circles here are the number of people who can be in that space, but at the beginning of the game, all of these, there's only 1 circle that's available in any space. In round 2, only 2 are available, and in round 3, all 3 are available. Round 4, which is here, all 4 circles are available. You won't be going out there until round 4 anyway, probably, so I wouldn't worry too much about that. Okay. After you do your exploration, you put your ship back home, and you're allowed to then trace from either your new home or your old home a number of movement points, hexes, whatever, equal to the total value of your shipping points. Every space that you go through that you've got a claim, you collect the money for. money being listed here. Well, we'll talk about that. That's going to be your round, your payout. Every space, because it's a little different than XX, every one of these temples that you go through, if you pay the cost, and this one has a cost of 0, you get the payout from that. This one has a cost of 20. The kingdom has to pay $20, and then it'll collect either 5, 6, 7, or nothing when it travels throughout. Now, that total amount that you collect, that doesn't go into your company treasury or get divided. Instead, you pay it out automatically. It moves your prestige forward 1 space, and everybody gets that amount of value per merchant that they personally own. The ones that are in the bank pool don't count. Those markers that aren't committed to being merchants don't count. All right, well, gosh, how do you get money in your company treasury then? Yeah, especially since you can pillage each operating round. Well, the way you do that is if you don't want to send your ships out and make money for your shares, in round 2 you can pocket 100, or round 1, arrow 1, you can pocket 100, 202, 300, 400. You just don't send your ships out. It doesn't raise your prestige value. It doesn't lower it either. And the company gets a pile of cash. Then you're allowed to buy ships. The ships have a cost on them. You're allowed to hold up to 3 ships. You're allowed, after the first 4 ship goes, to buy ships between companies for an agreed upon price of at least 1. I think we've kind of gotten to the end of the line here, to tell you the truth. There are a couple of little things left. If you have no ship, yeah, there's a couple of key things. If you have no ship and it's your operating round, then you must have one. You must buy one. And if you can't negotiate a price between 2 companies, and there isn't one, and you can't afford one here with the cash on hand you have with the company, then you will be forced to release more shares. And you have to release enough merchants, and only that many merchants, that you can afford the next available ship. And you do that at 1 less than your current prestige. So if this guy's prestige was 120, he would only be getting 110 per merchant, and the price drops. So there's a slight cost of forced sales. If you can't cover it with your forced sale, you make as much of a forced sale as you can, then you have to cover it out of pocket. And you're allowed to sell merchants, I believe, to cover the cost. If you still can't cover it, you've gone bankrupt and the game ends. It's the only way to end the game early, otherwise it ends here. I think it's pretty hard for there to be a bankruptcy unless you're really doing some, I don't know, what I'd call pretty stupid things, but some people might think otherwise, just because. But this one actually makes them stupider. It ends at the end of that round, I believe. Yeah, so it's possible for multiple people to go bankrupt, which means you can't be sitting there saying, I'm going to be the second person to hit that bankruptcy layer, so the game will end and I won't ever have to pay the price for the risky decisions that I've made. You still might be able to get into that kind of position where your long-term prospects aren't very good, but that's okay. What I always hate is the game of chicken that happens in conventions, at least in some 1830 conventions, where everybody just goes in there, tries to make money as fast as possible, doesn't worry about trying to save their companies, because what they figure is, if I'm not the first person to go bankrupt, I've been making so much money that I'll come in first, because the first person who goes bankrupt is out of, the thing. But if I'm the first person who goes bankrupt, well, I lose. But only the people who are taking this strategy have any chance of winning the game. It's a mindset that only makes sense if other people are taking it too, because if you're the only person doing that, you will just lose. Okay. But if anybody's taking it, then it becomes probably worthwhile for everybody to be doing it, which kind of destroys the game as far as I'm concerned. So where are we? We're at, yeah. So at the end of the game, you count up the prestige value of your shares, I mean merchants, and your cash on hand, I mean drachma, you know, and I think that's it. Yeah. And it's pretty much your standard for an XX in a lot of ways. I like some of the things that this added to the canon, and I'm probably going to pick it up. Because it does feel a little shorter with that fixed length, and it does provide, and here's the thing, it provides some of the things that I like about 2038 in a much, much tinier package. Anyway, let's send this up.